Well, here we are, in the new year, and I think it's only appropriate to talk about one of my favorite years in gaming, 2024. Truly an incredibly stacked year with some of the best bosses I have ever fought. And today I want to talk about my 10 favorites. Before I really get into the ranking, I first need to lay out some rules. Rule number 1, both games and DLCs are fair game. However, there are so many incredible bosses this year, which brings me to the second and last rule of this video ranking. I can only include 3 bosses per game or expansion to present in this video. However, should there be more than 3 bosses I deem worthy or even top 10 worthy without this rule, I will definitely at least mention them. And another thing, Final Fantasy 16 is one of my new favorite games of all time, but sadly it's a 2023 game and not 2024, so I will be only talking about the expansion released this year, Rising Tide. Besides that, I won't really rank any other bosses. However, I wanna mention a few things about this game and how it works in general for the understanding of the other bosses. But yeah, besides that, that's pretty much it, and with the rules out of the way, let's get into the ranking. Number 10. Varem from Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown. I don't think there's a better way to start off this year's list than with my favorite 2D boss ever. I sadly didn't get the chance to play Nine Souls, and I heard one of the bosses there is one of the best 2D bosses ever, so if Nine Souls actually changes my mind and the final boss makes it into this list, I will include it in a pinned comment later down the line. But besides that, Varem is definitely the 2D boss that blew me away the most. It was honestly not that easy to pick a boss from this game because it has a lot of hitters. Of course, there is King Darius with some of the most fun attacks to avoid ever, and I also didn't get to fight the Ex-Kiana added in a free update, which is a shame, but I will definitely get to it at some point. And of course, I also need to talk about the DLC released this September, if I remember correctly, which added 2 of the best bosses in the game, Rajan and Artaban, the super boss, both respectively being some of the best bosses in this game too. But I think none of them is as great as Varem. Varem has an amazing story, and he's basically the reason the entire plot happens to begin with. The setup and presentation is genuinely fantastic, and the music is also so cool. Varem ends up betraying you pretty early on in the story and absolutely humiliates you. But later, after becoming a lot stronger and facing a lot of strong opponents, you actually become strong enough to face him, and you basically travel back in time to stop him from killing the prince. Now, you and your original self, I know it sounds a bit confusing, fight him in phase 1, but of course the original one can't keep up and gets demolished. And then you just get the best 2D boss ever. So many quick and dangerous combos and reaction checks that are best parried. Some attacks you need to position yourself perfectly. Some attacks like the Judgment Cut where you need to juggle in the air. And these things just get more intense as the phase goes on. It's such a good fight, and I need to talk about my 2 favorite ways this boss attacks. There is one ability which Varem has that is basically rewinding time, where he rewinds time to a certain point and has a surprise follow-up afterwards. In phase 2 this is very easy because it's usually just this easy slam, but later it gets super brutal when he starts doing the massive spinny vortexes, and it's just such a great attack. But of course the best one, for everyone who has fought this boss knows it, are these slashes and spins. The way he can mix them up in phase 3 is just insane and legit just probably the hardest thing to avoid in the entire game for me. The way he can delay them or release them instantly is just thrilling. It starts out super easily in phase 1 and it's pretty manageable in phase 2 just to prepare you for the onslaught that is phase 3. All in all, just an incredible boss fight with a great story and the best 2D moveset I've ever seen, at least so far. Number 9. Eldrene Tiba from Stellar Blade. I already talked about this boss on my channel and it was in my top 5 final bosses video. So as you can guess from that, the Eldrene Tiba is the final boss in Stellar Blade, at least one of them. And he's amazing. He was my personal biggest challenge in the game, and overcoming him definitely took me a few attempts. He tests you on everything you've learned in the game. All the different counters you have to use throughout the entire game, your use of the gun, and most importantly of course parrying, having some of the hardest combos, even mixing them with some of the counters. It's a great fight mechanically, super fun, super clean, super cinematic, great stuff. However, the best part about this boss for me is easily the presentation. It's an all-timer. This biblical angel design of the Eldrene Tiba just looks absolutely stunning. The arena is also just this incredible place. I can't even describe it. It just looks so stunning. And there are some of the craziest moments in the fight, some of the most cinematic attacks I've ever seen in a game. It's just incredible stuff. He also has one of the best soundtracks in gaming. gaming, it's incredible. But this fight just wouldn't hit as hard if the story wasn't on point. And while the Stellar Blade story is pretty neat and I enjoyed it, it's nothing groundbreaking. However, there is one character to this, and that's Adam, who secretly is the Elder Naytiba. He is your companion throughout the entire game, but at the end of the game he basically reveals his true identity, and it's a really great moment. So Elder Naytiba, definitely an all-timer boss for presentation alone. But of course I need to mention a few other hitters from Stellar Blade because this game honestly has some incredible bosses. Both of the Raven fights, the Unidentified Naytiba and Raven, are great and probably the best bosses mechanically in the game. Super fun. And I also want to mention Demo Crawler for having one of the best soundtracks of all time, easily top 5 probably, and also still being very fun and a great presentation too. But yeah, that concludes the Elder Naytiba chapter. Honestly, just an amazing boss. Number 8, Supreme Inspector from Black Myth Wukong. Going from a boss with incredible presentation and a pretty awesome moveset to basically the reverse of it. Supreme Inspector has a pretty neat presentation with some awesome visuals, a great design and some pretty nice music. However, the most important part about this fight, without a doubt, is the moveset, which, as all the top 3 in Wukong, is just incredible. The precision this boss demands, the intensifying phases are just stunning. Phase 1 really just teaches you the basics, but all of this will come into practice in the other phases, because if you don't learn the basics here, he will just annihilate you in phase 2 and especially phase 3. He has some of the cleanest animations in the industry, as goes for Wukong in general, and it's just so fun. You learn his most common and important moves in this phase, and he has this very awesome wing block attack that has different follow-ups, which is a super fun way to create this block mechanic. But around phase 2 it gets really good. He starts using his one-wheel bike thingy, and now he starts unleashing some of the deadliest combos in the entire game. The thing is, this guy is not really hard to defeat in the main story by that point because of stats, but mastering this boss seems like one of the hardest things you can do in any game I've ever seen. He's so dangerous, relentless, has so many varying timings, it's insane. And that just gets more intense and crazy in the phase 3, where he draws a giant circle of red lightning fire, and I don't even know what to say. It looks amazing. The way he basically has you trapped, and the music being as intimidating as it is, it creates this super tense atmosphere where you just basically fight for your life. It's such a blast, and especially pulling off clutch like this is incredible. It's such a fun fight, and honestly I love this boss. And let me tell you one secret, this is definitely not the last boss in this list from Black Myth Wukong. Number 7, the Timekeeper from Final Fantasy XVI Rising Tide. Ah yes, the first Final Fantasy XVI entry, and as I mentioned, this expansion being the only part of this game that released in 2024, that means I'm only taking bosses from this DLC into consideration. And with this, let's talk about Timekeeper. Timekeeper might just be the best boss in Final Fantasy XVI when talking about mechanics. It's between him and Omega from the other DLC that released very late last year. Timekeeper has an incredibly awesome arsenal of a lot of difficult moves. He has his standard combos that he loves to mix up between a sword and a big hammer. He has his time freeze attacks, which are some of the hardest to dodge in the game, requiring very precise timing. And of course he has his final oath attack, which is an incredibly long string of attacks and very difficult to master. Well, talking about very difficult, Final Fantasy XVI is not really a hard game if you play it with all your advantages. However, if you limit yourself to not using heals or checkpoints, this fight is genuinely very difficult. And for some stupid reason, I decided it would be a good idea to do this boss no damage on my first playthrough. So I thought, alright, it can't be that bad. And after 6 or 7 more hours and a lot of frustrating defeats, I finally did it. It's an absolutely brutal and difficult fight to do completely no damage, because Final Fantasy XVI bosses in general take a lot of time, and there are unskippable cutscenes that would play every time after you defeat phase 1, which is pretty painful for replayability. But even besides that, I had a blast and I absolutely adore this boss. He's great, fun to fight, and even has a cute little story, with him being a Shiva's companion similar to your dog buddy Torgal in the game, and even getting a nice little conclusion in a side quest. Nice stuff. So yeah, Timekeeper, amazing boss. By the way, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. It would help out the channel massively and I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Number 6, Leviathan from the Rising Tide DLC. Even though Timekeeper has probably the best or second best moveset in Final Fantasy XVI, Leviathan still takes the cake here, because in my opinion, he's one of the most important and one of the coolest bosses in the entire game. First, Leviathan's story is pretty amazing and once again reinforcing the game's themes in general. Basically, this child, Valius, was sealed away 8 years ago in time for the Stripe's own uses, basically robbing him of a life and free choices to make. And this is something our main party tries to break during the entire game. And yes, even on a smaller scale here in the DLC. And once they finally succeed, it's a really beautiful moment. So his story is super important and was honestly very compelling. But not only is his story absolutely amazing, this guy also has some of the best visuals. Because Final Fantasy XVI has a lot of icon fights. Basically, these are giant kaiju fights where you, as Ifrit, or even the Phoenix in a few instances, fight against the different huge icons, which are basically forces of nature used by the different nations for military purposes, or part of something even bigger. But I'm not really going into main game spoilers here. And I would say from all the icon fights, this probably has the third best presentation and probably the best mechanics in general. The fact that you counter these abilities making use of your entire moveset is something that the other icons truly lacked. And I think Leviathan did it really well. And of course, I need to mention the hardest DPS phase in the game. Basically, in this game, there is a mode called Press the Attack, which bosses use, where you have to unleash powerful attacks to quickly deplete this boss's bar, or he will do a move that basically one-shots you. And no other DPS phase requires precision as tight as Leviathan's. You really have to get comfortable with using Ifrit's moveset, because if you don't, you will fail it. However, after defeating this, you get the most fun Ifrit fight in the entire game. Dodging Leviathan's attacks is absolutely stunning, amazing, and the visuals only just make it better. Leviathan's design is absolutely glorious. It's a giant sea serpent, what more do you want? And the song Cascade playing during the fight is one of my favorite soundtracks from Final Fantasy XVI, which already has my new favorite soundtrack of all time. It's absolutely incredible, stunning music, and I can't get enough of it. Leviathan is absolutely incredible. Number 5, Bale the Dread. And with this, we are entering the top 5 bosses of 2024, which also all are top 10 bosses of all time for me, just to really show how insanely good this year was for bosses. And the 5th is Bale. Vile Bale. Just an amazing boss and my favorite dragon boss ever. He has an incredible moveset, basically topping Midir in every regard and expanding it. One of the best flows, especially in phase 2, and overall just a insane arsenal of very hard moves. I really need to mention this super move where he flies up, fills the whole arena with fire, and follows up with a few more fire breaths. It's such a thrilling move to dodge and it never gets boring. But not only does Bale have one of the best movesets for a beast fight or a dragon fight I have ever seen, he also has one of the best build-ups in From Software history. The way you climb the jagged peak and eventually reach Bale is absolutely stunning and fascinating. Overall, just a fantastic boss encounter, and he wouldn't be complete without my boy Egon. Egon is one of the best From Software NPCs, and for his very short stay, he managed to conquer all the hearts of FromSoft fans. He's just that good. Superb voice acting. Besides that, Bale's lore, with him fighting Placidus X, adds just a lot. His arena is fantastic and his music is also quite amazing. Both phases, in fact. Super underrated, I find. Not many people talk about his music. So yeah, Bale is just absolutely incredible. Number 4, the Great Sage's Broken Shell, or as I really like to refer to him, Sun Wukong himself. Game Science had the impossible task to create a boss fight for one of the most iconic fictional characters in human history. And I think they not only delivered and made a fascinating boss, they also made one of the best bosses of all time. Mechanically, this boss is just stunning. The amount of mix-ups, combo extensions, and overall just difficult moves to deal with is just staggering. And the fact that they added an alternate version in a free update with new abilities is just absolutely incredible. It's stunning beyond belief. But not only is this boss mechanically super impressive, his presentation and build-up is some of the best in gaming. Of course, Wukong, being the important character that he is quite a bit focus of the game, Black Myth Wukong. And the way you learn more and more about him throughout the entire game, and the way it climaxes at the end with first this amazing boat ride sequence, then the stone monkey, which by the way also got a new update fight, and it's one of the best gang fights I have ever seen in a game, so there's that. But after that, you basically fight this shell of Sun Wukong, which regained some bits of personality and even has stuff like teasing you after he beats you down. It's just amazing. The animations are stunning, the presentation is wonderful, the arena is beautiful, and the music is some of the best work in Wukong. So yeah, I think this boss achieved everything it wanted to do and even more. It's an incredible achievement by game science, and it should be celebrated for years, because this is how you do a final boss. Really just capping off the game and ending it on a high note. Absolutely incredible, 10 out of 10. Number 3, Promised Consul Radahn from Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. Well, here we are, at possibly the most controversial boss in gaming history. And even through his pretty chaotic release and some issues yet at the start, I just love this boss. He has an absolutely awesome build up. The NPC quest lines surrounding this boss are just incredibly interesting and leads to a pretty intense finale. His presentation is one of the best by From Software. He has fantastic and incredible cutscenes, some of the best in the series as well. And he is my single favorite soundtrack in gaming. Promised Consul Radahn's theme is so good. His arena is also honestly just stunning. It just looks so good. I love fighting in it. So what were the issues people had with this boss? Well, first there is of course the story. Yeah, Radahn is a beloved base game boss, and defeating him in the festival was a very special moment, so I understand why some people wouldn't like bringing him back, but I think it was done in a very good way. Like, I think the writing was pretty well done. I think there is a very high chance that this was not a retcon, because if it was one, it's a very impressive retcon because it works so well with the lore. I personally just like the story. If you don't, that's very fair and that's your opinion. It's very subjective. The real reason why most people disliked this boss was because he was a broken mess. He had so many bugs, there were a lot of issues, and worst of all, there was the worst attack ever, the double slash. This attack was basically a brutal roll catcher that was only avoidable with certain Ashes of War or if you're standing in a certain position, and it was just really bad. However, luckily From Software listened to the feedback and actually decided to patch this attack, turning it into a very tight reaction check. And it's so fun now. Genuinely just awesome. Because this attack was honestly the biggest thing holding this boss back. I think his flow is really amazing, his attacks look cinematic, he has some of the most fun attacks in the series, and I just really enjoy dodging his massive swords with the follow-up beams in phase 2. In general, this fight, amazing stuff. I think Promised Consul Radahn is goated, but I do understand why this boss is not everyone's cup of tea. Number 2, Erlang the Sacred Divinity from Black Myth Wukong. Erlang is just a boss who really has it all. He has some of the best presentation in gaming, with his initial phase being great, with amazing attacks like the phase 2 transitioner with the X and all his attacks looking really flashy, but also having 2 pretty much spectacle oriented phases following it. It's absolutely satisfying beating down the Heavenly Kings and Erlang Shen himself, and it just feels like such a nice power trip at the end of the game. It's amazing. But the presentation in his ground level fight is also nothing to scoff at. It's a huge giant snowfield at the top of a mountain, which is always a nice and amazing setting. He has my favorite boss soundtrack in Wukong. It's just so good. And Erlang is of course a fantastic character with interesting motifs and just amazing writing. Great stuff. So we're really off to a great start. But the best thing about Erlang, even with all his other amazing tidbits, is of course his moveset. I think Erlang is mechanically the best boss ever made. It's not even a question for me. He has so many mix-ups, positioning checks, reaction checks, insanely long combos, hard to dodge attacks. He really just has it all, and he uses it all. Phase 2 really just prepares you for the basics. If you don't learn the stuff in phase 2, he will demolish you in the later phases. He loves to dodge your heavy charge attacks, making you really work hard to get your damage in. His combos also get so absurdly long that you just have to learn hitting him in between combos and perfect dodging to really maximize your damage, because otherwise this boss will take ages. It's such a hard boss and probably the most complex boss you will ever encounter in a game. Another crazy thing is that in phase 3 Erlang basically invents combos. He just has so many variations that no fight I ever did with him felt the same. It's just absolutely stunning, and I have no idea how people manage to no damage this boss, but maybe I will be able to do it one day, so we will see. Erlang is just absolutely peak. If you are a mechanics oriented player, I'd say playing Black Myth Wukong is just worth for Erlang alone. And coming in at number 1, it's of course Messmer the Impaler from Shadow of the Erdtree. I mean, who else could it really be? But before I get into why I think Messmer is the best boss ever made, first let me give a shout out to the other Shadow of the Earth bosses who sadly didn't make it into the video. The Divine Beast Dancing Lion is a fantastic boss with incredible mechanics, incredible presentation, great music, overall just a joy to fight, and I can't wait to master this guy even more. Rolana is a great boss with incredible mechanics as well and a fantastic flow. Super fun to do. Midra has one of the best presentations in FromSoft history, one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard in gaming, and last but not least, the Shadow Tree Avatar, probably a shocking take for some, which I do understand, but especially phase 3 with that somber music, it was one of my favorite moments in gaming history. I don't know, it was just a very personal moment and I really enjoyed it, so I think the boss at least deserves a mention, even though I think he's definitely far from the top 10 best bosses of this year. But yeah, now let's talk about Messmer. I've stated multiple times that Messmer is not only my favorite Elden Ring boss or my favorite Soulsborne boss, but my favorite boss of all time. And that statement still holds true. I really don't know what it is about Messmer, but everything about him just clicks for me. I really love his story, it's my favorite character in the Soul series, his lore is super interesting and tragic, and he's just a super fascinating character to analyze. He's so great. But not only is the story incredible, everything about his presentation is fantastic too. His music is one of the finest soundtracks in Elden Ring, his cutscenes are some of the best in the series and super captivating. The way his flames look in the dark arena and contrast with the darkness is so good, and Messmer has my favorite design in the Soul series. It looks absolutely incredible, and especially the body horror in phase 2 is something to behold. Man, it's just so unsettling. I love it so much. Great stuff. And if this wasn't enough, Messmer is also mechanically one of my favorite bosses I've ever fought. Phase 1 has an incredibly amazing flow, allowing for a lot of creativity in finding good ways to dodge the attacks, and you really can just do a lot of optimization to make this fight look amazing. Some of the dodges are just astounding. But not only is phase 1 already one of my favorite phases, phase 2 is my favorite phase ever, period. His big snake attacks are my favorite attack in the series, they look so cool, they feel so good to dodge, and the flow in phase 2 is just unbeatable. The way these attacks all flow into each other, creating 30-second long combos and even longer, is just incredibly stunning, and I can't get sick of fighting this boss. This is like by far my favorite boss ever. Yes, this year I played Final Fantasy 16 and the final boss there became my second favorite boss of all time because of the incredible presentation, super impactful story, great mechanics, and just being one of the best experiences I ever had in gaming. But not even this incredible masterpiece in Final Fantasy 16 or Erlang, the best mechanical boss ever, could beat Messmer for me, because Messmer really just ticks all the boxes. He's so good and I can't get enough of him. Messmer the Impaler is the GOAT. Thank you so much for watching this video. As I already explained in my Gaming is Better in 2024 video, I don't think gaming is on a decline. Quite the opposite, I think gaming is on a rise. And you really can see it with bosses like Messmer or Erlang. Both released this year and being some of the most incredible fights I have ever seen. And I think if devs keep at it, especially FromSoft, but also Game Science and all the other amazing devs whose games I love playing, I think we will eventually have a boss that might even surpass Erlang and Messmer and their like. It's just that incredible. I'm really excited for the future, and I'm also really excited for your comments. Please tell me which bosses you like, what were your favorites this year, maybe what were your least favorites, which bosses you agree or disagree with. Let's have a nice discussion about this. 2024 was one of my favorite years for gaming, and I'm so excited for next year. It will be an incredible year for gaming once again, and it will be just so fun. Thank you so much for watching again, and I hope I will see you here again next time. Until then, bye!